Alright, so today we're going to talk about the literary elements. You might have seen this term on your rubrics for fiction and been like, what is that? I'm losing points for that. Well, today you're going to find out what that means. And a lot of it you probably are already doing, you don't even know you're doing it, or you've learned it before but you kind of forgot, so bear with me if some of this is a little bit of a review. Alright, so the first one we're going to talk about today is metaphor. So metaphor is a comparison between two things that does not use the word like or as. Like or as we'll get to in a second. Why do we use metaphor? Okay, so you use metaphor when you want to describe something, but it's kind of hard to describe without comparing it to something else. So you take something with which the reader is unfamiliar. Let's say, a person, a character in your story. They don't know that character. So you compare some part of that character to something that they are familiar with. So let's say you want them to understand what a character's hair looks like. You're like, well, how do I describe it? Well, people know what corn looks like. So I can say her corn-colored hair. Now, all of a sudden, because we made that comparison, the reader is more clear on what her hair looks like. So some examples of this would be the mountain of a man stood in the doorway, and the metaphor there is mountain of a man because people know what a mountain is, so you're comparing the character to a mountain so that we have a clearer image of him. Her ashy hair was pulled back in a bun. We know what ash looks like, so now we have a greater understanding of what the hair looks like. It's black with a little bit of gray in it. The quilt of white and gray clouds, that's the metaphor here, hung over the city. So now we can picture this more. Everyone knows what a quilt is, so they can picture what the sky looks like. So with metaphor, the goal is to use a comparison to enhance clarity for the reader, so the reader is more clear about what you're trying to describe. Simile. Okay, what is a simile? So I told you we were getting to the like or an as. This is how we're getting to the like or the as. A simile is a comparison between two things that does use the words like or as. I think this is easier to do the metaphor. It's probably not as sophisticated, but it can achieve the same result. So why do we use simile? The same reason. If we compare something that the reader doesn't know to something that they do know, we increase clarity, make the image easier for them to imagine. So some examples would be she ran as fast as a cheetah. You see that as there. We're comparing the speed of her running to a cheetah, so we know it's fast. Just better than saying she ran quickly. His voice was like thunder. We know what thunder sounds like, so we can now picture what his voice sounds like. The storm was like a monster. We know what the idea of a monster is, so now we can understand how intense the storm was. All of these things help to make the image clearer for the reader. All right, the next one is personification. Personification is a little bit more complicated. Personification is a type of metaphor. It's when you give human traits to an object, place, emotion, or idea. So you can do that in two ways. The first way is to involve action verbs that are predominantly human. So in other words, give that object or place or emotion or idea, have it doing something that humans usually do, not clouds or words or whatever. So some examples would be danced, spat, yawned, winked, kicked, glared, etc. These are all things that humans do, not necessarily objects. So if you make the objects do it, that's personification. Another example would be to use an adjective that's a predominantly human adjective. So happy. Usually you don't think of things other than people being happy. Timid. Again, that's a human emotion, a human adjective. Shy, angry, vindictive, jealous. Again, none of these things are things we typically think of objects being. So when you use them to kind of describe an object, that's personification. So why do we use personification? Okay, so it's a little bit more complex. The first reason we use personification is because it enhances sophistication. Anytime you use personification, it comes off as just more sophisticated of a writing style than other ways of describing it. Not that other ways of describing it are bad, they're just not as sophisticated often. It enhances specificity. So when you just say like the clouds look dark, it doesn't give it the kind of detail that if you say the clouds looked angry. And again, I think that really leads into the third point, which is that it enhances an emotional reaction. The clouds look dark. Yeah, we can picture it, but the clouds looked angry. That gives us, as readers, an emotional reaction to that. We're like, oh, that sounds kind of scary. So we've made it more important and more valuable to the reader. So here are some examples. The wind yelled in my ears. So here we're using the verb technique because wind can't yell. Yelling is a human behavior. So, but the wind yelled in my ears. We know what that means, right? I mean, that means the wind was loud and kind of just like suffocatingly loud. Her words punched me in the stomach. Again, punching is a human activity. And the words obviously didn't actually punch you in the stomach, but it explains to us how maybe scary or mean or hurtful these words were, that they caused her to feel like she was punched in the stomach. The bashful son, again, bashful, that's an adjective way of using personification. Bashful is not normally anything but a human emotion. So the bashful son peaked, again, peaking is a human action. So here we're using adjective and verb to create personification. The bashful son peeked out of the clouds for only a moment. All right, and the last one we're going to look at today is alliteration. What is alliteration? Alliteration is when you repeat consonant sounds at the beginnings of numerous words within a phrase, sentence, or series of sentences. Why do we use alliteration? It enhances rhythm, which is why it's frequently used in poetry, because it kind of almost gives your writing like a musical feel. And it draws attention to a passage or makes it memorable. We tend to remember things when they have a beat or rhythm. So if you want us to really pay attention to a moment, adding alliteration can help us to do that. The whipping wind tossed the tree limbs around. So let's look at what's the repeated consonant sound here. First, we have the repeated W with whipping wind. And then we have the repeated T with tossed tree limbs. All right, let's look at the second one. His gaze galloped across the room. So here we have the repeated G, gaze and galloped. And this is also an example of metaphor, because galloped is not something that gaze can do. The king carefully selected the nicest cantaloupe. All right, I was kind of running out of ideas here on sentences. Many apologies. But this is a good example of it doesn't always have to be the repetition of consonants. It's a repetition of consonant sounds. So here it's not the K or the C that's repeated. It's the K sound. K, king, careful, cantaloupe. They're all repeating. Even though this is a K, it's still repeating the same sound, and therefore it's alliteration. So those are the four we're going to study. So I want you to look at this picture, and if you can imagine how you would put those four into action, and I'm going to kind of do it for you. But if you want to pause it here and try to do it yourself, feel free. So first of all, if I was going to say metaphor, I might say, let's see, the towering trees touch the sky. So I'm comparing these trees to a tower. That's metaphor. If I'm going to say simile, I could say the bridge stretched out like a snake. I'm comparing the shape and length of the bridge to like a snake, and I'm using that like, so that's simile. Personification, I could say the lights on the bridge winked. These little lights here, that would be personification, because lights don't really wink, humans wink. That's a human action, so therefore that's personification. And for alliteration, I actually already did it with my metaphor as well, so I'm going to go back to that, which is the towering tree touch the sky. Touch the sky. We have towering tree and touched. That's the repetition of the consonant sound T. I know that was a little fast. We're going to do it again with one more picture. All right. So this swimmer here looks like she's working hard. All right. So again, if you want to do this, try this on your own. Go ahead and pause it. We're looking for metaphor, simile, personification, and alliteration in this picture. And I'm going to go ahead and model that for you. So for metaphor, I might say the cavern of her mouth sucked in a gulp of air. So the cavern, I'm comparing her mouth here to a cavern to show that it's open, gaping. So the cavern of her mouth sucked in air. That cavern of her mouth, that's a metaphor. I'm comparing her mouth to a cavern. For simile, I might say, let's see, the water reflected like glass. So I'm comparing the water to glass because it has a reflective quality just like glass does. For personification, I might say the water retreated from her body as she splashed out. Again, retreating, that's a human action. So by using that human action, I'm using personification. The waves retreated from her body. And for alliteration, I might say her tensed tendons prepared themselves for the next stroke. So tensed tendons, a repetition of that T sound. It's kind of a cop-out because I used the T on the last one, but you get the idea. So, thanks for watching. If you have questions, feel free to ask me.